Phil, you've talked about how you sort of volunteered into the environmental movement, coming out of the consulting business and not liking that experience, and now trying to find something to grab onto, initially with EDF in various ways. At some point, you decided you really wanted to dig into this as a profession. So how did that happen, and how did that lead to working on the Stanislaus further with Friends of the River?
Well, I could really see that there was an opportunity to rethink the way water resources and rivers were managed in California. Once I got involved in the Auburn Dam and the New Melones Dam issue, what you have to understand is that these big dam projects were sold to the public more for their benefits, for public benefits, as flood control projects, whereas their real benefits were going to irrigation. By the time the New Melones Dam was being planned and constructed, there were at least some attempts to integrate an idea of floodplain management downstream of the project. And so as part of a project, a floodway corridor was acquired. When Friends of the River asked me to see whether we could come up with an operating regime that would enable us to manage a reservoir so it didn't flood the canyon, I could see that the key to it was simply making use of what the Corps of Engineers had promised, which was integrate a floodplain management approach with a reservoir operation approach for flood management.
So this is in the late 70s. New Melones is almost done, or it is done. And in 1979, it's going to start to fill up. So Friends of the River is trying to say, look, we can reoperate this dam in different ways that make more sense. And you're one of the key people helping to articulate why in very specific engineering and policy terms.
Yeah, by this time I'd been working on a lot of different flood management projects in the western United States, so I'm becoming quite familiar with the constraints and how you could actually rethink the way flood risks are managed. And so when Friends of the River asked me to take a look at this, I could see that the key was really making sure that you could do an operation regime that actually followed through on what the Corps of Engineers originally proposed, which was to integrate a floodplain management, restoration and management with a reservoir operation. So in the 78, 79, we developed these operational models. We gave appeared at all the
you were in front of the water board in California. You eventually
presented these results.
You eventually moved in front of the U.S. Congress and the federal bills to try to give wild and scenic status to the river.
Right, and so it actually wasn't it was pretty easy to demonstrate this, because one of the things about the New Melones Dam is it's such a huge reservoir compared to the amount of runoff we could get in the watershed. So the frequency at which you're likely to inundate the upper canyon really is determined by how much you release during flood events. And we were able to demonstrate that a reasonable flood regime,
which would have kept the river to Parrott's Ferry level and preserving the upper 9 miles.
And only under the most extreme circumstances would you need to temporarily inundate the upper canyon. So that's the argument we made. And that's what we're over.
And that was made in front of so the state had its water hearings, the federal government had bills, the Army Corps itself and the Bureau of Reclamation had processes.
Yep, that's so all of the different regular governmental process, Friends of the River was quite assiduous in following the processes that have been outlined for.
You just showed me hundreds of pages of documents from this period in which very detailed proposals and comments were filed with the federal government and the state government that you were heavily involved in a lot of, and others. And FOR was deeply engaged in the science of all this stuff. not just emoting about the value of the river.
Absolutely. It was looking at the irrigation deliveries, the power, the true energy costs, the impact on the fisheries, all of these factors. Friends of the River, we were all integrating those in the operating plan that we were presenting to the state board and said, this is, if you can direct the federal government to follow this, we will give the best shot of preserving the canyon.
Yeah, there's I think a lot of perception that Friends of the River's campaigns were just sort of activist campaigns protesting things, but what reveals in your comment is how much solid analysis and science went into making the proposals to be reasonable with New Melones.
Yeah, we had, some of the top fisheries people working with us on it. Don Kelly, the notable fisheries person. We had economists from UC Davis helping us out. So we had the credible case. But
we didn't have the politics
exactly
to make it happen.
That's right.
Yeah.